Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, today we begin the 13th topic of this revisiting the history of the collection and transmission of the Quran series. This 13th topic relates to a narrative in which a certain arrangement of the Quran has been depicted. And when I say arrangement, I refer to the surah arrangement of the Quran. Now, this topic has been a subject of hot debate amongst many scholars vis-a-vis the nature of the surahs, the way they have been arranged in the Quran, and different people have come up with different reasons. But besides that, the most important thing is that it is alleged that the Prophet himself has said that the sequence in which the Quran has been arranged has a particular pattern, and that pattern he has described in a certain narrative. So we shall look at the text of this narrative, then we shall see the questions which arise on the text of the narrative and also on its chain of narration. But let me first read out to you a typical text of this narrative, and the text that I'm going to read out is from Abu Ubaid's Fadailul Quran. So the words are, the narrative is reported by Wasila ibn al-Asqa. So he says, عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أعطيت السبع الطول مكان التوراة وأعطيت المئين مكان الإنجيل وأعطيت المثاني مكان الزبور وفضلت بالمفصل. Wasila ibn al-Asqa reports from the Prophet, I have been given the 7 tuwal in place of the Torah, the Me'in in place of the Injil, the Mathani in place of the Psalms, and have further been blessed with the Mufassal. Now, I would also like to clarify at the outset that, as you can see, this narrative speaks of as-sabat tuwal, the 7 long, which is supposed to mean or understood to mean the 7 long surahs. Now, the word tuwal actually is the plural of tula and atwal, and in that respect would mean the longest, as it's the superlative degree. But we have some other narratives in which the word tiwal instead of tuwal is mentioned, and tiwal is the plural of tawil, which means long. So we can see that some narratives speak of 7 longest surahs and others speak of 7 long surahs. But if we collate all the texts, we can simply see that these two words are used rather interchangeably, and they refer to the 7 long surahs as opposed to the 7 longest surahs. So this is the text of the narrative that I have just read out before you. And now let us see the questions which arise on the text of this narrative. Now, the first question which arises in my mind when I study this narrative is, there is absolutely no explanation from the Prophet or from any of his companions as to what exactly is the reference to these 4 categories. I mean, what are the surahs which belong to each of these categories, and what exactly, for example, is the meaning of the Ma'in or the Masani or the Mufassal names. We can posit the fact that the 7 long surahs refer to the 7 long surahs, but then again, which of these 7 long surahs are referred to, because we have a different opinion in this regard, although we also have the opinions of the Sahaba, but again, and at times of the Tabi'un, but again, there is no definite answer as to which surahs belong to which of these 4 categories, and obviously also the fact that, as I said, that what exactly is the meaning of some of these categories, as I shall just presently demonstrate. So it is very important that if this was a sequence of the Quran, of the surahs of the Quran, which was given by the Prophet, then we should have known, first of all, that what exactly is the meaning of these 4 categories, which the Prophet himself has supposed to have told us in this narrative. So let me give you some explanations of how our past scholars have interpreted these 4 names and how they have made this sequence come the way they interpret it in the light of this narrative. So let's first see the Sabut Tiwal, the 7 long surahs. Now, according to a Suyuti, one group believes that the first of these is Al-Baqarah and the last is Al-Bara, which of course means that Surah Anfal, which is the 8th surah, is not counted because it's a short surah. So one of the opinions is that the first is Al-Baqarah and the last is Al-Bara, which is the 9th surah. Surah Baqarah is the 2nd surah, Surah Al-Bara is the 9th surah. If we subtract Surah Anfal from this list, then we get 7 surahs. Now, Suyuti also says that another opinion is that a narrative from Ibn Abbas, which this opinion is based on a narrative from Ibn Abbas and is reported by Al-Hakim and Al-Nasai, that says that the Sabat Tiwal are Al-Baqarah, Al-Imran, Nisa, Ma'idah, An'am, and Araf. And this comes to 6 surahs actually, and we do not have Anfal. And the narrator actually says that he forgot the 7th one. Now, this particular narrative I could not find in Al-Hakim or in Nasai, their respective books, but I found this narrative in the tafsir of At-Tabari. And as you can see, the narrative is being displayed before you. And the narrative is from Abdullah ibn Abbas, and it is actually an explanation of the expression Sabam al-Masani. So it is said that the 7 surahs are Al-Baqarah, wa Al-Imran, wa Nisa, wal Ma'idah, wal An'am, wal A'raf. And Israel ibn Yunus, who is one of the narrators of this report, says that the 7th was mentioned before him, but he has forgotten it. وَذُكِرَ السَّابِعَ فَنَسِيتُهَا. Although the 7th had been mentioned to him, but he has forgotten it. Now, there is another narrative from Sayyid ibn Jubair, and that has been reported by Ibn Abi Hatim, and also a similar one from Ibn Abbas, that the 7th surah which this person had forgotten was Surah Yunus, and both these narratives are found in Al-Durr al-Mansur of Suyuti. So the fact that Sayyid ibn Jubair and Ibn Abbas both say that this the 7th surah which was forgotten by the narrator is actually Surah Yunus, which would again mean that these 7 long surahs are not consecutively arranged, because we know that if we count Surah Yunus as the 7th surah, Surah Yunus is the 10th surah in number. So this would be one opinion, that Surah Yunus is the 7th surah. But as I said, these narratives are found in Ad-Durr al-Mansur of Suyuti, and you can see both these narratives being displayed before you. I'm not going to read out the text, as you can clearly see that both mention Araf, after Surah Araf, Surah Yunus. And this would mean that these 7 long surahs are not consecutive, because after Araf, we do not have the 8th surah, which is Surah Anfal, neither do we have the 9th surah, which is Surah Tawbah or Surah Bara. So Surah Yunus is the 10th surah. So this would mean that the 7 long surahs, as is depicted by these 2 narratives, are actually not consecutive. We find them not only to be not consecutive earlier on, because we do not have Anfal and Surah Tawbah. So the actual number is that the surahs are not arranged the way one would see that they are arranged in the same sequence, or at least they should be adjacent to one another. Now, there is another narrative also in the book of Al-Hakim, which says that, and which also occurs in the Durr al-Mansur of Suyuti, that the 7th surah, which the narrator had forgot, is actually Surah Kahf, which is the 18th surah. So as you can see from the narrative being displayed before you, again here we have Al-Baqarah, Al-Imran, Nisa, Ma'idah, An'am, A'raf, and then Araf, which is the 7th surah, there is a jump, and we have the 18th surah, which is the 7th, which would become the 7th surah in this sequence. So again, we can see clearly that here too, that the 7 long surahs are not consecutively arranged, because as far as Baqarah, Ali Imran, Nisa, Ma'idah, An'am, and Araf are concerned, they are all consecutive, but we don't have Anfal, which is the 8th surah. We do not have Surah Tawbah, that is the 9th surah, and right up to the 17th surah, which is Surah Bani Israel. These are not mentioned because Surah Kahf is the 18th in sequence. So the 7th long one, as depicted by this narrative, and this again is by Ibn Abbas. So we have again contradictory views from Abdullah ibn Abbas himself. One of them says that the 7th surah is Surah Yunus, and the other one, which I have just described, says that Surah Kahf is the 7th surah. So you can clearly see the discrepancy. So this was as far as the discussion is concerned regarding the tiwal or the tiwal surahs. We have conflicting views, as I said, which you can see. We do not have anything from the Prophet himself, and then it is also rather strange to see that if these are 7 long surahs which speak of a certain sequence, then again we should consider it very natural that these 7 surahs, if they are the ones that we are being talked about, then they should at least occur one after the other, but they don't, as you can see, at least from these opinions. So let's move on to the next term which is used in this narrative, and they are the main surahs. Again, as I said earlier on, there is nothing absolutely in this regard from the Prophet himself. Now, in the opinions of Zarkashi and Suyuti, it refers to those verses, surahs which have more than 100 verses or close to 100 verses, because the word mi'ah in Arabic means 100. So in all probability, they have extrapolated this word, and therefore they think, as Suyuti and Zarkashi think, that these are surahs which have close to 100 verses or exactly 100 verses. We next move on to the Mathani category, which is the third category which the Prophet spoke of allegedly in that narrative. And here we can find some more opinions as well, more than one opinion. Thus, for example, in the opinion of Al-Bayhaqi, which he has cited in his Shu'ab al-Iman, they are surahs which have less than 100 verses, but more than those of the Mufassal surahs. So, according to Al-Bayhaqi, the Mufassal surahs which come later on, so these surahs are the ones which have verses which exceed the number of verses of the Mufassal surahs, but they are less than 100 verses. And remember, the main surahs are the ones which have 100 or close to 100 surahs. So the supposition is that these are the verses, these are the surahs which have less than 100, but these are not as less as the Mufassal ones. They are more in number than the Mufassal surahs, more than the verse numbers of the Mufassal surahs. Now, according to Al-Farra, as recorded by Suyuti again on his Al-Itqan, they are called Mathani because they are read more than the tiwal surahs and the Ma'in surahs. So here comes the interpretation of one of the scholars of Ma'an al-Qur'an, Al-Farra, who thinks that they have been called so because they are read more than the tiwal surahs and the Ma'in surahs. Now, Suyuti has recorded another opinion about the reason for them being called Al-Mathani, and that is that they form a pair to the Ma'in surahs. So according to him, the Mathani surahs, they form a pair with the Ma'in surahs. Again, this is a conjecture which has been made. Now, in the opinion of Nikzavi, again, which has been recorded by Suyuti, they are called so because in them anecdotes are repeated, and this repetition is for the reason of delivering the message of the Qur'an. Now, still another opinion in this regard, which is also recorded by Suyuti, is that they are called Mathani because they are called Mathani because this is a name which is applied to the whole of the Quran, and as such to Surah Fatiha as well. So, as recorded by Suyuti, the Mathani is a name applied to the whole of the Quran and also to the Surah Fatiha. So, these are some of the opinions which tell us that why these surahs have been named as the Mathani surahs. So, you can see, viewers, that the only person who has pointed out that which of these surahs relate to this category is Bayhaqi, who says that they are the surahs in which the number of verses is either less than 100 but more than the Mufassal surahs. The rest of the opinion which I have cited, they all tell us that why they have been named as Mathani. So again, this does not give us any conclusive picture. So next we come to the final category which is mentioned in this narrative, which is the Mufassal surahs, the name which the Prophet has set as the Mufassal surahs. Now, according to Suyuti, they are placed after the Mathani surahs because they are the shorter surahs and are called so since there are a lot of divisions between the surahs because of the basmala. So, since they are very short surahs and after every end of a surah, the next surah begins very soon by the formulaic basmala. So therefore, they are called the Mufassal surahs. Now, still another opinion in this regard is that they are called so because they contain very few abrogated verses, and for this reason, they are also called Muhkam surahs, as is specified by a narrative in Bukhari from Sayyid ibn Jubair. So this is another opinion in this regard. Now, Suyuti goes on to say that there is a consensus that the last of these is Surah Nas. This is absolutely certain because they could not go beyond that because that is the last surah of the Quran. However, as far as the surah is concerned from which these Mufassal surahs begin, Suyuti says that there are at least 12 opinions. And again, these 12 opinions I'm going to read out before you just to signify the fact that how diverse and how different the interpretations are in this regard, and how in the presence of these interpretations can we come up to any definite answer. So, one of them, the first opinion is that Surah Kaf, which is the 50th surah. With that surah begins the Mufassal surahs, and this is on the basis of a hadith which has been narrated by Aus ibn Huzaifa. Now, another opinion, or the second opinion in this regard, is that of the fact that Surah Hujurat, which is the 49th surah, from Surah Hujurat begin the Mufassal surahs, and this has been specified by Imam An-Nawawi. Now, the third opinion in this regard is that the Mufassal surah begin with Surah Muhammad, which is the 47th surah, and Al-Mawrid has attributed this opinion to the majority. The fourth opinion in this regard is Surah Jasiyah, which is the 45th surah. So the fourth opinion says that from Surah Jasiyah, the 45th surah, begin the Mufassal surahs, and this is attributed to Qazi Ayaz. Now, viewers, as far as the 5th, 6th, and 7th surahs, 5th, 6th, and 7th opinions are concerned, I'm going to read them out to you, but with the caution that these are narrated by Ibn Abi Saif in his Nuqat al-Tanbih. So Suyuti says that the 5th, 6th, and 7th opinion, respectively, are the ones which have been recorded, narrated by Ibn Abi Saif in his Nuqat al-Tanbih, in his book Nuqat al-Tanbih, and they are, the 5th opinion is that the Mufassal surah begin with Surah Safat, which is the 37th surah. The 6th opinion is that the Mufassal surahs begin with Surah Saf, which is the 61st surah. And the 7th opinion is that the Mufassal ones begin with Surah Mulk, which is the 67th surah. So you can see that these are the 5th, 6th, and 7th opinion in this regard are all the ones which are recorded or narrated by Ibn Abi Saif in his Nuqat al-Tanbih. Now, as far as the 8th opinion is concerned, it says that the Mufassal surahs begin with Surah Fath, which is the 48th surah. And this is narrated by Kamal al-Zumari in his Sharh al-Tanbih. Now, the 9th opinion in this regard is that Surah Rahman, or the 55th surah of the Quran, from this surah begin the Mufassal surahs. And this has been recorded by Ibn Sayyid in his notes on Al-Mu'atta. The 10th opinion in this regard is Surah Insan, or Surah Dahar, the 76th surah, is the surah from which the Mufassal surahs begin. But in this regard, we do not have any particular authority who says so. Suyuti has just recorded this opinion. As far as the 11th surah is concerned, it is said that Surah Sabbaha is the surah from which the Mufassal surahs begin. And this has been narrated by Ibn Firqa from Al-Marzuqi in his Ta'liq. The 12th and final opinion in this regard is that Surah Duha, which is the 93rd surah. From this surah begin the Mufassal surahs, and this is the opinion recorded by Al-Khattabi. So, viewers, I have read out all these opinions before you just to inform you of the fact that there is such a difference of opinion in this regard, in the presence of which we can simply not categorize which surahs belong to which of these categories. We have differences in the tiwal category, we have differences in the main category, we have differences in the Mufassal category, in the Mathani category, and again in the Mufassal category. We are absolutely at a loss to categorize surahs in these four formats, because we do not have any definite opinion in this regard, either from the Prophet or from his companions, and in the presence of which this sequence becomes irrelevant for us, because we have no idea as to which particular surahs belong to which of these four categories. So this is the first point of critique that comes to my mind. Now, as far as the second point of critique is concerned, I would like you to take a look at the chart which is being displayed before you. And this chart, viewers, you can see is actually a chart which consists of two columns. The first column, the left column, is the one which states the surah, the name of the surah, and you can see right beside it the number of verses which are placed right beside, which are the number of verses of which each surah consists. So you can see Surah Fatiha consisting of 6 verses, and so on and so forth. You can just slide through the number of verses and see how the number of verses have been, the number of verses which each surah contains. So I just have a glimpse through this chart, and I can just tell you that Surah Fatiha and then the rest of the surahs have surahs of verses of varying number of lengths. And if you go on to, for example, you continue to Surah Maryam, which is the 19th surah, and then to Surah Zumar, the 39th surah, and then so on and so forth. So 49th is Surah Hujurat, 63 is Munafiqun. Just slide down and see that Surah Ghashiyah is the 88th surah. And then finally we can see that the Quran ends on Surah Nas with 6 verses. So viewers, you can clearly see that in the presence of these number of verses, it is absolutely difficult to make out where the main surahs, for example, if we think that the main surahs are the ones which have close to 100 verses, then where do this end and where do they start? Because we can have different contenders for the main surahs. We can have Surah Bani Israel, we can have Surah Nahl, we can have Surah Kahf, we can have Surah Maryam. As you can see, all these surahs being indicated before you. Surah Nahl is the 16th surah, Surah Bani Israel is 17, and so on. And these are the surahs which have slightly more than 100 verses. But then again, we have Surah Shu'ara, which is the 26th surah, that has 227 verses. And in between, we have surahs which have much less than 100 verses. And again, if you go on to the 37th surah, which is Surah Safat, it has 182 verses. But between Surah Shu'ara, which is the 26th surah, and Surah Safat, which is the 37th surah, we have surahs which have much less than 100 verses. For example, we have Surah Rum, which has 60 verses. We have Surah Sabah, which is the 34th surah, and it has only 54 verses. And this pattern continues even later. Thus, for example, you can see that this situation right after Surah Safat. In Surah Swad, we have surahs which have less than 100 verses. There's the surah, it has 88, and so on and so forth. So in the presence of this data, it is absolutely difficult to see that where the tiwal or the tiwal surahs end, and where the Mathani begin, because if we accept the fact that the main surahs are the surahs in which they are close to 100 verses. And this is made even more complex by the scenario that these 100 verse surahs, all of them are not placed adjacent to one another, as I just pointed out, because in between we have surahs which have much less than 100 verses. So how can we make any decision in this regard when we find that these surahs which are close to 100 or less than 100 verses, they are not even arranged adjacent to one another, they are not in successive, they do not occur in a successive sequence. And between these number of verses, we have surahs which have these number of verses, we have surahs which have a lot less number of verses than 100. So this is the second point of criticism that comes to my mind. Now, as far as the third point of criticism is concerned, I would say that this is again something which is very strange, and that is that the number of verses of a surah is not a proper depiction of its length, because there are some verses which are very long and there are some verses which are very short. So the verses of the Qur'an are not of the same size and length, and the number of verses itself cannot become a judge of the length of a surah. This could have only become a judge had all the verses been of the same size. We could have said that a surah which has a more number of verses should be more lengthy than a surah which has less number of verses. But we find that the proportion between the length of the surah is exactly not the same as its number. So we have at times so many verses which consist of 8 or 9 sentences, and they make up one verse. And at times we have very short verses. So this criteria in itself would never have been regarded by the Prophet to be the criteria of judging the length of a surah, because, as I said, the verses of the Qur'an are not of the same size and length. Since they are not of the same size and length, so therefore the number of verses of each surah, they could not have become a measure of how long a surah is and how long it is not. So this standard could not have been used by the Prophet because of these reasons. Now, the fourth and final criticism which comes to my mind consists of certain contradiction between various texts which have been reported in this regard. And let me cite some of these texts. As you can see, that the text which I read out before you earlier on was from Abu Ubaid's Kitab of Fazail Qur'an. And in that particular text, we see that the Prophet had said that he has been given the Ma'in in place of Injil, the Mathani in place of the Psalms, and we have some other texts which report the entire reverse. And the reverse is that the Ma'in have been given in place of the Psalms and the Mathani in place of Injil. And this can be seen from a narrative from Musnad Ahmad ibn Hanbal, as you can see, which has been displayed before you. And this again is from the same person, from Wasila ibn al-Asqa. It says, "U'titu makana Tawrah as-sab'a wa u'titu makana Zabur al-Ma'in wa u'titu makana al-Injil al-Mathani." So here you can see it is exactly the reverse. As I said, in the previous The one which I cited before you from Abu Ubaid's Fazal al-Quran is exactly the reverse. That said that the Zabur has been given in place of the Mathani, and the Injil has been given in place of the Ma'in. But here we find the exact opposite. Now, still another contradiction in this regard, that is there is a narrative which is reported by Bara and which has been recorded by Al-Qurtubi, and this particular narrative is an entirely different scheme of the sequence of the Quranic surahs. And as I said, it has been recorded by Al-Qurtubi in his Jami' al-Ahkam, and you can see the narrative being displayed before you. And here the words are, this narrative has been reported by a different person, Al-Bara ibn Azib, and he says that An-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam قال إن الله أعطاني السبع طوال مكان التوراة وأعطاني المئين مكان الإنجيل وأعطاني التواسين مكان الزبور وفضلني بالهواميم والمفصل ما قرأهن نبي قبلي. Which means the Almighty has given me the sabat tiwal in place of the Torah, the Ma'in in place of the Injil, the Tawasin. Now this is a new entry. The Tawasin, which of course means the surahs which begin by the name Tasin. The Tawasin in place of the Psalms, and has further given me the Hawamim and the Mufassal, which no prophet before me has read. So we find a different arrangement or a different connotation of words in this particular narrative. And another narrative, now this time it has been reported by Anas ibn Malik and has been recorded by Fazl Qadir, gives still another scheme, and this scheme is different from the rest. And this time it has been reported, as I said, by Fazl Qadir, Al-Manawi in his Fazl Qadir, Sharah Jami' al-Saghir. Now here the words are, Anas ibn Malik says, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الله أعطاني السبع طوال مكان التوراة وأعطاني الراءات إلى التواسين مكان الإنجيل وأعطاني ما بين التواسين إلى الحواميم مكان الزبور وفضلني بالحواميم والمفصل ما قرأهن نبي قبلي. Anas said that he heard the Messenger of God say, I have been given the As-Sab'a Tiwal in place of the Torah, the surahs from the Arra'at to the Tawasin in place of the Injil. So these are the surahs which lie between these two. The surahs between the Tawasin and the Hawamim in place of the Psalms, and have been further blessed with the Hawamim and the Mufassal. None of the prophets before me recited the likes of them. So this is still another scheme. So we have two other narratives from At-Tabrani which have a scheme which is displayed in a very incomplete manner. Now the first of them is reported by Abu Umama, and he says, An Abi Amama قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم آتاني ربي السبع طوال مكان التوراة والمئتين مكان الإنجيل وفضلت بالمفصل. So this is one of the incomplete scheme. And then we have another narrative also from Tabrani, and this has been reported by Wasila himself, who is a person from whom the initial narrative which I read out at the beginning has been reported. And here the words are, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أعطيت مكان التوراة السبع وأعطيت مكان الزبور المثاني وفضلت بالمفصل. So you can see that both of these narratives have missing categories. In the first of these, you can see that the category of Mathani is missing, and in the second of these category, you can see the second of these narratives, you can see that the missing category is Ma'in. So in the presence of this data, viewers, you can see that we have contradictory sequence being relayed or displayed by different narratives. So these are the four important questions which arise in my mind regarding the text of this narrative, and in the presence of these questions, I do not regard this narrative to be reliable. First of all, as I said, we do not have any specific definition from the Prophet as to which of these surahs belong to which of these categories, and the names of the categories themselves are subject to debate. The Prophet never specified them supposedly as to which surahs belong to which category, and if we go by the interpretation of various scholars or various tabi'un even, or the Sahaba, we find that these surahs do not lie consecutively the categories should have been consecutive, but we find that they do not exist in this consecutive form. Then we saw that the number of the surahs which are proportional, the length of a surah could not have become a standard for the length of the length of a verse could not have become a standard for the length of a surah, because the length of a verse is not standard in the Quran. Different verses have different lengths, and in the presence of this, the Prophet could not have used surah length to be a standard or a criterion, because as I said, different verses have different lengths. Some verses have many sentences, and there are other verses which are very short. And finally, we also saw that this sequence of surahs, which is related in this narrative Abu Ubaid, is contradicted by many other narratives which present either in an opposite scheme, either in an incomplete scheme, and still others who have a new format of schemes or new names which are inducted in their schemes. And in the presence of this data, in which all these categories seem to contradict one another, we just cannot rely on this narrative, the categories which it depicts. And inshallah, in the next episode, we shall look up the chains of narration of these different narratives, so that we can clearly see if they too stand to the test of historical criticism or not. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.